Hey guys, tonight we wander through the dim corridors of a world where medicine means mystery, superstition, and occasionally a spoonful of pure terror. You stand in a medieval apothecary, the kind of place that smells like old leather, wilted herbs, and a hint of panic. Clay jars line the walls, each scribbled with Latin words that no one, including the apothecary, can really pronounce. Somewhere in the corner, a cauldron bubbles, but it's not soup. It's something that might balance your humors or melt your eyebrows. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step closer to the counter where an apothecary, part scientist, part gambler, measures out powders and potions with shaking hands. He promises relief from coughs, headaches, and heartbreaks alike. His main ingredients, crushed beetles, dried toad, and something ominously labeled mummy powder. It's exactly what it sounds like. Ground up bits of mummified human remains imported from Egypt and sold to cure everything from stomach aches to melancholy. Historians still argue whether anyone truly believed it worked or just pretended because it was expensive. The air is thick with sage smoke and desperation. Every shelf holds a different shade of hope. Honey for wounds, vinegar for fevers, and powdered pearls for nobility who think shimmer equals health. The apothecary assures you that every illness stems from an imbalance in the four sacred humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you sneeze too much or feel gloomy, it's not your sinuses or sadness. It's that your humors are having a midlife crisis. He hands you a vial of something cloudy and insists it'll cool your bile. You ask what's in it. He says, with all seriousness, mostly mercury. You smile weakly. He's serious. Mercury, yes, the liquid metal, is considered almost magical in its ability to purge the body of bad energies. Never mind that it also purges the body of life. Nearby, a boy grinds herbs with a mortar and pestle, humming a hymn. He's mixing comfrey leaves, used for broken bones, with pig fat and wine. The concoction supposedly draws out evil spirits while sealing wounds. In practice, it mostly attracts flies. But comfrey, in fairness, does have some modern medicinal backing. Its nickname, knitbone, wasn't entirely off. You dab a little on your hand just to see what happens. It burns. You're told that means it's working. From the street outside, the clang of a blacksmith mixes with the moans of patients waiting for their turn. Someone coughs hard enough to sound like an exorcism. A man limps in clutching his stomach, and the apothecary greets him like an old friend. Too much bile again, eh? The man nods miserably and accepts a pouch of dried leeches like candy at checkout. There's a strange sort of comfort in this chaos. Medicine here isn't cold or clinical, it's communal. Everyone shares remedies, stories, and second-hand advice from their cousin's monk. Someone claims garlic rubbed on the feet can cure a headache. Someone else swears by boiled frog water. You make a mental note never to visit for a dinner party. A woman in fine velvet arrives next, her face pale under heavy powder. She requests something for nerves. The apothecary gives her valerian root steeped in wine. She'll sleep well tonight, or she'll just sleep forever. The dosage difference is slim. You wonder if he knows. He probably doesn't. Most apothecaries work on trial and error. mostly error. Historians still argue whether these early practitioners were precursors to pharmacists or glorified salesmen with good handwriting. Behind the counter, shelves groan under the weight of ingredients that read like a witch's pantry: snakeskins, horse teeth, and desiccated bats. You spot one jar labeled Draconicus. Dragon blood, he says proudly. You suspect it's just tree resin, but you don't want to ruin his day. There's charm in the belief itself, in the idea that a few exotic powders could stand between you and death. The apothecary invites you to sniff something called theriac, a universal antidote for all poisons, first concocted in ancient Rome and now adopted by everyone who wants to feel important. It contains over 60 ingredients, including opium, cinnamon, and occasionally bits of viper. Best taken daily, he insists, for health. You realize people here casually microdose snake parts and think you're the weird one for hesitating. You leave a few coins on the table, purchasing a pouch of something that smells faintly like regret. He promises it'll restore your vigor. You decide not to ask what kind of vigor he means. Out in the narrow street, you pass another vendor selling charms against the evil eye, small glass beads strung with dried herbs. You notice how medicine and magic blur together here. For every healer, there's a holy man, and for every potion, a prayer. If one doesn't work, the other surely will, or so they say. As night falls, the air cools and fills with wood smoke. You wander past a sign shaped like a red and white pole, symbol of a barber's shop. Inside, a man sharpens his knife, grinning as if expecting you. You promise yourself you'll stick to the apothecary next time, but something tells you the next chapter of this medieval health tour is about to get much sharper. Still, there's something strangely soothing in the absurdity. You're part of a world trying, really trying, to make sense of the body without understanding germs, cells, or even soap. People boil snakes, bleed patients, and pray to saints because doing something feels better than doing nothing. And maybe, just maybe, one of these bizarre recipes occasionally works, by chance or placebo. As you glance back at the apothecary's flickering lantern, you think about how medicine today, clean, bright, and sterile, owes its origins to these cluttered, smelly little shops. Every capsule of antibiotics carries a faint echo of powdered mummy and viper venom, repackaged and refined by centuries of trial, error, and occasional survival. You breathe in, smell the herbs and decay, and step toward the sound of the sharpening blade, ready, or not, for your next appointment. The barber-surgeon's shop greets you with a gleam of metal and a smell of blood so faintly metallic it almost tastes like fear. You step inside, ducking beneath bundles of herbs hung to ward off disease, though they're probably just to mask the stench. A chair sits in the center, wide, wooden, and intimidatingly stained. Beside it, a table gleams with razors, forceps, and hooks, each one scrubbed with something that might once have been wine. The barber-surgeon looks up with a grin that's all teeth and confidence. He's wearing a leather apron spattered like abstract art, and a hat that somehow makes him look both professional and unhinged. "You here for a trim or a tune-up?" he asks. You realize there's not much difference. You sit, because apparently you trust strangers holding sharp objects near your arteries. He starts with small talk, weather, crops, the usual, before casually asking if you've been feeling sluggish. You admit you've been tired lately. "Aha," he says, as if he's solved the mystery of life. Too much blood happens to the best of us. Before you can protest, he ties a strip of cloth around your arm, pulls out a gleaming knife, and assures you this is completely routine. You're reminded that in medieval medicine, bleeding was the cure for practically everything, from headaches to heartbreaks. The idea was simple. If your humors are unbalanced, just remove the extra one. Historians still argue whether this was genuine theory or just a very creative way to justify knife ownership. He makes a quick cut, and the blood flows into a shallow bowl. He watches the color carefully, nodding like a wine taster. "Nice shade," he says approvingly. "Bit thick, though. Too much heat in the liver." You're not sure what your liver has to do with anything, but he seems thrilled. He hums while you get dizzier, as if he's shaving your soul. Then comes the leech jar, because no medieval medical performance is complete without it. Inside, several plump little creatures writhe lazily, waiting for dinner. "They know good blood when they smell it," he says fondly, as if discussing pets. He plucks one out and sets it on your wrist. You feel a faint pinch, then nothing. Just the slow, rhythmic pull as it does what leeches do best, freeload. According to the barber surgeon, this is high science. He tells you that leeches are divine instruments, able to draw out bad blood and restore balance. You glance around and notice other patients, one with leeches on his temples, another with them clinging to his ankles. They look pale but optimistic. You suspect that optimism is all they have left. A boy with a bucket enters and dumps it out by the door. The contents are not water. "Old cures," the barber says casually. You try not to look. "You'll feel weak for a bit," he adds, "but that means it's working." That's the medieval mantra for everything from fevers to accidental amputations. To be fair, barber surgeons were the multitaskers of their time. They cut hair, pulled teeth, set bones, and occasionally performed full amputations, all without anesthetic. Surgery wasn't a noble art. It was manual labor for people who didn't mind a bit of screaming. Physicians, university-educated, Latin-quoting scholars, considered surgery beneath them. "Too messy," they said, as if they weren't prescribing pigeon droppings. The barber sets down the blade and pats your shoulder. "You're lucky," he says. "A century ago. We used hot irons for this." You almost thank him before realizing he might still have one somewhere. He picks up another instrument, a long metal hook shaped like a question mark. "Sometimes," he explains, "we use this for toothaches." You ask how. He smiles. "We find the bad tooth, we pull it, quickly." You eye the hook. It's not reassuring. He admits that sometimes they pull the wrong tooth, but insists it's fine because the humors adjust. Historians still argue whether medieval dentistry counted as medicine or just socially acceptable assault. In the corner, a bucket of sawdust collects blood drips. The barber rinses his hands briefly in a basin of cold water, then wipes them on his apron. "Clean enough," he mutters. Infection is an unknown concept here. People think pus is a good sign, proof that the body is purging evil. You decide not to bring up germs. You'd sound like a heretic. He offers to trim your hair as a courtesy. You decline. He shrugs and starts shaving another man's head instead, perhaps to treat migraines, perhaps to keep lice from forming a commune. The red and white striped pole outside, that's not decorative. It represents blood and bandages, red for the bleeding, white for the cloths. Some even say the pole's spiral pattern came from patients gripping it while they were drained. A grim little design legacy. Now you'll think of that every time you pass a barber shop. As you stand to leave, You feel lightheaded. He presses a small cup of wine into your hand. For strength, he says. It's probably more sanitary than water. Since everyone drinks from shared wells doubling as neighborhood disease fountains, you gulp it gratefully. Before you step out, you notice a chart pinned to the wall, crude drawings of the human body labeled with zodiac signs. The barber surgeon believes surgery must align with the stars. Cutting under the wrong constellation could ruin your karma or your liver. He's dead serious. Never bleed under Aries, he warns. The head's too fiery then. You promise to remember that as if you'll ever let him near you again. Outside, the cool air hits your skin like relief. The leech marks throb, but your mind hums with curiosity. For all its horror, there's logic buried in the madness. Primitive attempts to understand circulation, balance, and cause. They just didn't have microscopes or Netflix documentaries to help. Instead, they had knives, stars, and a lot of faith. You watch a group of monks walk past, their robes brushing the mud. They carry small boxes of herbs and vials of oil, monastic healers on their way to tend the sick. They bow politely to the barber surgeon, who raises his blade in greeting. You realize that in this strange medical ecosystem, everyone thinks they're right. And maybe that's the most dangerous symptom of all. Your arm aches, your sleeve is sticky, and your curiosity's not quite cured. You follow the monks, drawn by the promise of quieter remedies, something gentler than knives, maybe something that doesn't bleed you dry. The sound of bells drifts over the rooftops, marking the hour. Somewhere ahead, the next chapter of this medicinal misadventure is already brewing, probably in a jar that once held pickled eels. You keep walking, one hand pressed to your bandaged arm, wondering what they'll try next time you say you have a headache. You follow the monks down the winding street, past stalls selling onions, candles, and suspiciously glowing cheese, until you reach a low stone building humming with quiet activity. Inside, the air is damp and herbal, thick with the scent of damp straw and something iron-like. You realize it's blood again. A patient moans softly nearby, while another mutters prayers. In the center of it all stands a wooden table, and on it, a shallow basin writhing with movement. You blink. They're leeches, lots of them. The monk in charge, a calm man with surprisingly steady hands, gestures you closer. God's tiny healers, he whispers reverently, as if the squirming things are saints. You try to look impressed instead of nauseous. The basin bubbles faintly as the leeches twist and stretch, searching for something, probably your pulse. These little freeloaders are the celebrity doctors of the Middle Ages. Whether you're noble or peasant, feverish or simply feeling unbalanced, a leech session is the go-to fix. Cupping, cutting, or sucking, the monk recites like a menu. We offer all three. You politely decline to choose. He explains the process anyway, because monks love education almost as much as salvation. Leeches, he says, are part of the sacred art of phlebotomy, not the modern kind with gloves and clean needles, but the sort done with faith and animal instinct. The logic follows the same theory you met with the barber surgeon. Too much of one humor, especially blood, makes you sick. Remove some, and balance is restored. Simple math, catastrophic results. The monk holds up a single leech between thumb and forefinger. It dangles, glistening, like a damp raisin with ambition. This one came from the marshes, he says proudly. The fattest are always the best. You make a mental note never to visit those marshes. He places it on the back of a man's neck, where it immediately latches on and starts working. The patient winces but soon relaxes, probably from blood loss, not comfort. Historians still argue whether leeches genuinely helped anyone or simply delayed the inevitable. Some say they reduced swelling or pressure, especially in infections where drainage mattered. Others insist the benefits were purely placebo. Either way, leeches had good PR. Kings, popes, and peasants all lined up for their slimy services. You can't buy loyalty like that without a marketing campaign and maybe mild anemia. The monk gestures toward a shelf filled with jars labeled in Latin. One reads sanguis purgatus, meaning purified blood. You're not sure what's inside, but it's thick, dark, and unsettlingly fresh. We collect what's drained, he explains, to study the humor's character. You decide you don't want to know what happens in the study phase. Across the room, a woman coughs violently, and a younger monk rushes to her side, pressing a warm cloth soaked in vinegar to her chest. Balances the humors, he says. Everything balances the humors, apparently. Bleeding, sweating, vomiting, or drinking questionable fluids. You wonder if anyone's ever tried balancing the theory itself. Leech therapy wasn't just for people either. Horses, dogs, even falcons got the same treatment. A noble's prized hunting bird could have leeches applied to its wings if it seemed sluggish. Overfed on blood, they'd say, which feels like the medieval equivalent of needs a detox. You imagine a room full of knights carefully leeching their falcons and try not to laugh. One of the monks invites you to hold a jar. Inside, the leeches slither languidly, their tiny mouths opening and closing in slow, hypnotic rhythm. They can live a year between meals, he says proudly. You stare at the creature, suddenly respecting its patience. You can't even skip lunch without attitude. To keep the mood from getting too serious, the monk adds cheerfully, when they're full, they fall off. Sometimes they crawl away and come back when hungry again. Faithful little things. You imagine waking up to find one of them returning for dessert and shudder. There's a debate among scholars about how leeches were disposed of afterward. Some sources claim they were burned. Others, that they were simply released back into the river, recycling, medieval style. You picture a stream full of slightly tipsy, half-bloated leeches and can't help smirking. The monk notices. You mustn't mock them, he warns. They're tools of divine balance. You apologize to the jar, just in case. For all the horror, you realize the system had a strange sort of order. The monks kept meticulous records: who was bled, how much, what time, and under which moon phase. Medicine, religion, and astrology were tangled like roots, each feeding the other. If the stars aligned wrong, no one dared treat a patient. Even leeches had schedules. As the monk continues explaining, he shows you a wooden stick carved with symbols. It's a bleeding stick used to stir the blood during draining to encourage flow. You decide that's more information than you needed before bed. The man on the table moans faintly, then sighs in relief or resignation. He's lighter now, the monk says approvingly. You glance at the bucket nearby and agree. He's definitely lighter. Outside, you hear the tolling of bells again, echoing through the misty air. The monks begin their evening prayers, chanting softly over the scent of herbs and iron. You realize how healing to them was as spiritual as physical. They treated illness as imbalance of soul as much as body. In that way, maybe their faith did heal, if not the infection, then the fear. You catch a whiff of lavender oil, sharp and sweet, cutting through the musty air. For calm, a novice monk murmurs, dabbing it behind your ear. You smile, half from gratitude, half from dizziness. It's oddly comforting, this blend of ritual and risk. They may not understand microbes, but they understand people. That half of healing is being cared for. Before you leave, the head monk hands you a small cloth packet. Inside are dried herbs, comfrey again, mixed with rosemary, and a few sprigs of something that smells like mint and smoke. For balance, he says. You thank him, even though you're not sure your balance can survive much more of this tour. As you step outside, night has deepened. The moonlight glints on puddles and reflects off the metal bowl you still carry. Your sample, he called it. You decide not to keep it. Somewhere nearby, water ripples softly, and you imagine leeches sliding through it, searching for their next medieval miracle. You walk on, past shuttered houses and flickering torches, wondering what other cures await, because surely there's something even stranger than bloodletting out there. Maybe something that doesn't involve losing any more of your bodily fluids. Then again, this is the Middle Ages. You're not betting on it. You wake the next morning to the sound of roosters and the clink of a chamber pot. Two things that, in medieval medicine, are disturbingly related. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of damp hay and, faintly, ammonia. You follow your nose down an alley where a cheerful man in a stained apron waves from behind a table full of glass bottles. They glint in the sunrise, filled with liquid in every shade of yellow imaginable. You wish you hadn't just eaten bread and cheese. Ah, good day, he calls. You're here for the water test, yes? You blink, unsure if that's an insult. He gestures to a stool and pats the seat. Sit, sit, I'll read your water. That's when it hits you. He means urine. In the medieval world, your pee is practically a personality test. The man produces a round glass flask called a matula, the standard tool of a physician's trade. He swirls one expertly, holding it up to the light like a sommelier. Lovely shade of gold, he murmurs. Hints of choleric humor, maybe a touch too warm. He gestures toward you. Yours? You shake your head vigorously. He shrugs. A pity. Fine vintage. In this era, urine analysis isn't just a weird hobby. It's one of the most respected diagnostic arts. Doctors travel with charts showing 20 shades of pee, each matched to an ailment. Pale and clear, you're lazy. Deep red, you're passionate. Or dying. Milky white. Definitely something wrong with your humors, probably your soul. Historians still argue whether the practice came from actual observation or sheer imagination, but there's no denying it was wildly popular. The pea doctor, because that's what you're calling him now, dips a finger into a sample, sniffs, and nods sagely. Too sweet, he says. An imbalance of moisture. You're grateful he's not your family physician. He reaches for another flask. This one, he says, belongs to the mayor's wife. Smells of melancholy. You consider moving to another town. There's something both absurd and oddly scientific about it. These physicians are, in their way, early empiricists. They're trying to find patterns between bodily fluids and illness. Primitive pathology with a dash of olfactory courage. Some records even describe doctors heating samples to see how they changed color, or sprinkling breadcrumbs in to watch if they sank or floated. Nature reveals herself, they'd say. You suspect nature was just trying to tell them to stop. You watch as an apprentice scurries by with a bucket labeled fresh. You decide not to ask. Would you like your own reading? The doctor asks brightly. You hesitate. What if I say no? He smiles. Then I'll guess. You sigh and hand him a small flask from the table. Definitely not yours, but he doesn't need to know. He studies it thoughtfully, swirling like a wizard peering into a crystal ball. He murmurs. You are prone to anxiety, often distracted, and perhaps skeptical of authority? You raise an eyebrow. The P told you that. He beams. It never lies. Apparently, medieval doctors also believed urine could predict your future health. Too foamy? You'll get gout. Too clear? You'll fade from weakness. Too dark? Start confessing your sins. And the smell. Well, they had entire manuals devoted to that. Some claimed that sweet-smelling urine was a sign of divine favor. Others said it meant worms. It's a toss-up, really. Of course, urine wasn't just diagnostic. It was medicinal. You can't help but flinch when he opens another jar labeled Aqua Vitae Humana, human water. He explains proudly that fresh morning urine can clean wounds, whiten teeth, and even soften fabric. Kings and queens use it, he insists. The best comes from red-haired boys. You stare at him. He nods solemnly. Everyone knows redheads make the purest distillate. Historians still argue whether that's folklore or the world's first marketing gimmick. You remember reading somewhere that tailors soaked cloth in urine to set dyes, and tanners used it to treat leather. So perhaps this isn't medicine so much as medieval multitasking. Waste not, want not, even when it's, well, waste. He points to a wooden tub where someone's washing their hands. You pray it's water. Cleanliness is health, the man says cheerfully. You almost laugh. Soap exists, but rarely gets invited to the party. Most people bathe twice a year unless they're monks, who at least rinse occasionally in holy water. The doctor gestures for you to follow him behind a curtain. There, on a table, sits a collection of flasks, arranged like stained glass, glowing in the dim light. He consults a chart painted with colors, pale, amber, ochre, rust, crimson. Beneath each, Latin phrases describe its virtue. You recognize one, urina bona, good urine. Another, urina mortis. You don't need to speak Latin to guess that one's not ideal. He launches into a lecture about the four humors again, linking them to liquids, urine for balance, blood for vitality, bile for courage, phlegm for calm. Too much or too little, he says gravely, and the body rebels. You nod politely, though you can't help thinking the body's already rebelling against this conversation. A boy bursts in carrying a flask and whispers urgently. The doctor frowns, sniffs, and announces, "A royal case." He straightens his robe and grabs a feather quill. To the castle. Apparently, someone important has suspiciously bubbly urine. He beckons you to come along, promising an education. Against your better judgment, you follow. At the castle, servants scurry, clutching towels and trays of fruit. The physician examines the flask ceremoniously, holding it up to the window so sunlight filters through. Courtiers gather around like it's a holy relic. Slight cloudiness, he declares, an excess of phlegm. The crowd gasps as if he's uncovered a scandal. Prescribe boiled parsley, garlic, and moderate prayer. The scribe writes it all down. Somewhere, a trumpeter plays a polite fanfare. You realize that diagnosis here is theater. The more dramatic the display, the more respect the doctor earns. And in truth, some did stumble upon real patterns, like diabetics producing sweet-smelling urine, though they wouldn't name it for centuries. You marvel at how a little observation, wrapped in ritual, could masquerade as certainty. As you leave, the doctor presses a small vial into your hand. For protection, he says mysteriously. You don't ask what's inside. You already know. The sun dips behind the hills, painting the town gold as you walk away from the castle. Somewhere, water drips into a bucket. You can't help thinking how much of medicine once depended on faith, chance, and the willingness to sniff things no one should. And just when you think it can't get weirder, you hear whispers of healers who mix herbs with spells, saints with syringes, and maybe, if you're unlucky, use your hair in potions. You head toward the forest, following the smell of sage smoke, where medicine meets magic, and curiosity might just get you burned. You wander deeper into the village until the cobblestone path gives way to packed earth. Winding between crooked cottages and herb gardens thick with green smells. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, and somewhere a rooster sounds as if he's regretting his entire existence. You follow the trail of incense and muttered prayers to a door marked with chalk symbols, protection runes, the kind that make churchmen nervous. You knock, and a woman's voice answers, "Enter, if your spirit's clean." You hope she's not taking that literally. Inside, the air hums, part spice, part secrecy. Dried bundles of plants hang from the rafters, clinking softly as they sway. The woman before you isn't a priest, or an apothecary, or even what you'd call a doctor. She's something older, a healer, a wise woman, though in certain seasons, depending on who's judging, she might just as easily be called a witch. She smiles, lines at her eyes from both laughter and suspicion. "You've been bled," she says, glancing at your sleeve, "and leeched and smoked in bad herbs." You nod sheepishly. "And yet you live. That's promising." She gestures for you to sit on a stool by the fire, where a pot simmers with something that smells like onions, mint, and vengeance. In her world, medicine is a conversation with nature. She doesn't need Latin words or astrological charts, only the feel of soil, the rhythm of the seasons, and enough courage to defy whatever the local priest preaches on Sunday. "The land tells us how to heal," she says, stirring her brew with a carved stick. If you listen closely, you're not sure if she means metaphorically or if the time actually whispers to her. On the wall hangs a tattered parchment drawn with symbols, planets, plants, and the human body overlaid in patterns of light. She explains that every herb has a celestial ruler. Mars governs nettles. The moon watches over chamomile. "We heal the spirit through the stars," she says. Historians still argue whether this doctrine of signatures was science or superstition, but to her, it's sacred truth. She picks up a jar filled with shimmering green oil. "This," she says, "is for fever." She opens it, and the scent of rosemary and vinegar fills the room. "You rub it here." She presses it to your temples. The warmth seeps in, and for a moment you feel oddly calm. "Most sickness," she continues, "comes from fear, sin, or someone wishing you ill. Sometimes all three." You think she's joking, but her eyes are deadly serious. As she works, you notice little relics tucked around the room, crosses beside carved wooden idols, a rosary draped over a jar of poppy seeds. She walks the thin line between church and paganism, curing the faithful one day and warding off curses the next. "If you burn sage, they call it witchcraft," she mutters. "If a priest does it, they call it holy smoke." You smile. "A matter of branding," you say. She laughs softly, the sound low and knowing. She takes your hand, turning it palm up, and traces the lines with a finger. "Too much bile," she murmurs. Of course. Your heat runs high. You must cool the blood. She tosses dried violets and powdered willow bark into a cup of water. The drink is bitter enough to make your tongue revolt, but it settles strangely well. You realize later that willow bark contains salicin, the ancestor of aspirin. Somewhere in this forest, Witch's intuition hides a glimmer of modern pharmacology. Outside you hear shouts, the heavy, self-righteous kind that carry torches. She doesn't flinch. The priest, she says calmly, he thinks I steal patience. You look at her shelves full of herbs and wonder if he might be right. Medieval healers were often the only line of defense for the poor, especially women who couldn't afford physicians. And while some villagers whispered, "Witch," others brought bread and blessings and thanks. She tells you about charms she's made for childbirth, little pouches of rue and fennel worn against the heart. Sometimes, she admits, it works only because it comforts. She smiles knowingly. Belief is half the medicine. Modern science might call that placebo. She just calls it faith. Then she shows you something darker, a bundle wrapped in cloth, filled with chicken bones, nettles, and a lock of hair. A curse undone, she says, a merchant's wife blamed for her husband's gout. They buried this under her doorstep. She tosses it into the fire, and it hisses, releasing a smell of burnt sage and justice. You'd be amazed, she says, how often illness starts with envy. Historians still debate how many so-called witches were just competent healers. The line between herbcraft and heresy blurred whenever someone powerful needed a scapegoat. One wrong cure, one wrong rumor, and suddenly your herb garden was evidence of a pact with the devil. She shrugs at the thought, unfazed. If the devil can cure fever, she says, maybe he's just better at medicine. You both laugh, quietly. The fire crackles, reflecting in the jars. She tells you about mandrake root, how it's said to scream when pulled from the earth, killing anyone who hears it. We use a dog, she says matter-of-factly. Tie the root to its tail, let it run. You blink. Does that work? She shrugs. Sometimes, mostly, we just lose the dog. The air shifts, soft, smoky, almost drowsy. You realize her hut feels more peaceful than any apothecary or barber shop. Maybe because she listens before she cuts, stirs before she prescribes. She talks of the moon's phases, of how fevers break with waning light. The body follows the sky, she says, and the sky follows no man. Before you leave, she gives you a small charm, a bit of twine threaded through a dried clove and sprig of yarrow. For courage, she says, you tuck it into your pocket. And for memory, she adds softly. So you'll remember that not all magic is madness. You step out into the fading daylight. The village glows amber, the air heavy with smoke and distant bells. Somewhere a priest preaches against darkness. Somewhere else a mother soothes her child with a whispered spell. Between them stands this strange middle ground, half faith, half fern, all humanity, where healing means trying, even when you don't understand why it works. And as you walk, you can't help but wonder, when they burned the witches, how much knowledge went up in that fire? You wander toward the castle again, where the air smells faintly of roasted meat and arrogance. The royal physician you've heard is the best in the land, educated, well paid, and wrong almost as often as everyone else. He greets you in a velvet robe trimmed with fur that probably cost more than an entire village's annual taxes. You're just in time, he says, beaming. The king's spleen is misbehaving again. You follow him into a chamber bright with candlelight and panic. The king lies on a bed piled with pillows, one hand pressed to his stomach. Courtiers hover like anxious moths. The physician circles him, holding a gold-rimmed mirror to the royal tongue, then peering at it as if decoding a map. "Yellow," he murmurs. "Excess bile. We must purge." Of course, the medieval cure-all, when in doubt, make the patient lose bodily fluids. The physician calls for a bowl of warm wine mixed with ground mustard seeds and something that smells distressingly like soap. He stirs it with a quill, hands it to the king, and smiles reassuringly. The king drinks, winces, and immediately demands a chamber pot. The courtiers applaud as if watching theater. "A successful treatment," the physician declares. "You're not sure what counts as success here, perhaps just surviving the prescription." He leads you to a table covered in instruments, scalpels, cups for bloodletting, and a few jars filled with ambiguous substances. One, he says proudly, contains powdered emeralds, ground gems meant to cool the blood. Another holds dried spiderwebs, used to stop bleeding. Nature hides miracles everywhere, he says, if one has the courage to crush them properly. Historians still argue whether these luxury ingredients were symbolic, medicinal, or just a way to justify the bill. The physician's logic is impeccable in its own circular way. He's read Galen, Hippocrates, and every treatise from Salerno to Baghdad. His worldview is a well-built clock, gears of humors, stars, and temperaments spinning in harmony. The trouble is, the clock tells the wrong time. Yet within that wrongness lies real observation. He notes fevers rise at night, that wounds fester differently in summer, that garlic helps digestion. He's wrong by inches, not by intent. He gestures for you to look through his pharmacy, a cabinet of bottles labeled in elegant Latin, opium thebicum, aqua rosae, pulvis unicornis. You dare to ask what unicorn powder really is? He grins. Narwhal horn, but don't tell the courtiers. He winks. Faith is half the cure. There's that theme again, belief as medicine, repetition as ritual. The king groans softly, and the physician rushes back. He orders a poultice of bread, onions, and pigeon droppings for the royal abdomen. Draws out the heat, he explains. You try not to laugh. Bread poultices were genuinely used to reduce swelling, though the pigeons less so. Still, he works with the gravity of a man performing sacred rites. He even prays aloud, "Lord, bless this bird's contribution to royal wellness." You can't help admiring the confidence. Every gesture is theater, every diagnosis a sermon. A misstep could mean banishment or worse, so he coats his guesses in Latin and reverence. The king's humors, he declares, are tempestuous but retrievable. He prescribes rest, broth, and a bloodletting under the constellation Leo. Never before sunset, he warns gravely, lest his spirit escape with the blood. Historians still debate whether court physicians truly believed these rules or simply played along to survive royal expectations. Many were brilliant scholars trapped in superstition's net. Others were charlatans wrapped in silk. Either way, they kept meticulous records detailing every royal sneeze like scripture. When the treatment ends, the king sleeps fitfully, and the physician finally exhales. He'll recover, he says. They always do. You wonder how many didn't. He gestures for you to follow him into a smaller study, quieter, dimmer, lined with scrolls. On the desk sits a human skull, polished smooth. For study, he says quickly, noticing your look, to remind me of life's fragility. He taps it lightly. Every cure begins here. He shows you anatomical sketches copied from Arabic texts, rough but remarkably detailed. They understand the body better than we, he admits softly. They're physicians cut to learn, not just to heal. You sense envy under his pride. He speaks of Avicenna's canon of medicine, how it reached Europe in Latin translation, transforming ideas of disease. Yet our bishops frown on such study, he sighs. They say to open a corpse is to defy God. He shrugs. Perhaps God should explain anatomy more clearly then. There's a spark of rebellion in him, a scholar caught between scripture and science. You realize he's not just a servant of superstition, but a man trying to push through it. Still, his tools are crude, his evidence anecdotal. He's balancing reason on a knife edge, and the knife isn't sterilized. As you leave the chamber, servants rush past with trays of herbs and steaming cloths. The physician pauses at the doorway. Remember, he says, we treat the humors because we must treat something. It comforts the sick to know their suffering has form. He looks tired now, the confidence fading like candlelight. Perhaps in another age they'll laugh at us. You nod. Perhaps, you say, but only because you help them reach that age. You step back into the courtyard. The air is cool, the sky pale blue, streaked with chimney smoke. You can still hear the physician's voice echoing behind you, half faith, half frustration. The scent of rosemary lingers from the royal poultice, mingling with the metallic tang of the moat. Somewhere beyond these walls, the plague is still simmering, waiting for its curtain call. And you, ever curious, drift toward it, into the blackened streets where medicine meets mortality head on. You don't have to wander far before the first whisper of dread reaches you. The air has changed, thicker, heavier, full of rot and smoke. A bell tolls somewhere ahead, slow and hollow, and people are nailing red-painted crosses to their doors. Lord have mercy, they scrawl above the lintels in trembling chalk. You already know what's coming. The plague, the Black Death, the medieval world's worst plot twist. You step carefully down a narrow lane where the smell alone could make you faint. Fires burn in the gutters, meant to purify the air, though mostly they just add a layer of smoke to the stench of decay. A man passes you with a bundle over his shoulder. You realize with a start it's not firewood, it's a body. He hums softly, a tune without hope. At the corner, a hooded figure waves a staff and shouts, "Keep your distance." His mask, long and beaked like a bird's, looks both ridiculous and terrifying. You've met your first plague doctor. The beak is stuffed with herbs, lavender, mint, and camphor, to protect him from miasma, the poisonous air thought to spread disease. Historians still argue whether this costume was practical or theatrical. Either way, it didn't work. He eyes you warily, then motions for you to follow. Apparently, you've just been drafted as his assistant. "We'll make rounds," he says through the mask, his voice muffled. "Watch and learn." You nod, wondering how to politely decline death by apprenticeship. Your first stop, a family huddled in a candlelit room. The mother's skin is blotched, her breathing shallow. Beside her, a child sleeps unnaturally still. The doctor opens his satchel and pulls out what looks like a pepper shaker filled with rose petals. "Sweet air drives out foul," he murmurs, shaking it gently. Then, from another pouch, he takes a hot iron and presses it near one of the black buboes swelling under the woman's arm. The sound is awful, the smell worse. To draw out the poison, he says, you bite back nausea. He moves on, scribbling notes with a quill between patients who coughed, who bled, who screamed. Documentation is vital, he insists. You're impressed by his composure until he leans closer and whispers, "It's the only way I remember who's still alive." In another room, a friar prays over the dead while his candle drips wax onto the floor. The doctor watches him sadly. "Prayer and fire," he says, "the only treatments that never run out." You can't tell if it's cynicism or faith. Back outside, he points to a wagon loaded with bodies shrouded in linen. "They burn them now," he says. "Better than burying. The earth's too full." The driver hums a hymn as the wheels creak over cobblestones. Children watch from windows, faces pale and silent. Somewhere, bells ring again, always ringing, always tolling. You ask what causes the plague. He shrugs. Bad air, bad planets, bad morals. Take your pick. He gestures to the sky. Mars and Saturn were too close last winter. That's never good. Some scholars blame corruption in the heavens, others corruption in the soul. Meanwhile, fleas on rats go about their unnoticed work, the true villains hiding in plain fur. He leads you to a makeshift hospital inside a monastery. Rows of straw pallets line the floor, each with someone moaning or muttering prayers. The brothers move quietly, faces wrapped in cloths soaked with vinegar. They wash nothing. Water spreads sickness, they believe, but sprinkle rosemary water liberally on everything. It smells almost pleasant until the next coughing fit breaks the illusion. One monk offers you a spoonful of a thick, tar-colored syrup. A lectuary of theriac, he explains. You recognize it from the apothecary, the universal antidote now repurposed for panic. Snake, opium, honey, 30 herbs. Keeps death away. You take a polite taste. It's awful. Does it work? You ask. He smiles gently. Sometimes for the soul, if not the body. You move from bed to bed, listening to the sounds of humanity unraveling. Someone calls for their mother, another for a priest. In the corner, a man sings softly to himself, a lullaby for no one. You realize that for all its horror, the plague created its own strange kind of compassion. Monks, midwives, gravediggers, people who stayed when others fled, became accidental saints of survival. Historians still argue whether the doctors and clergy helped or hindered. Many carried infection from house to house. Yet their persistence preserved more than bodies. It preserved the idea that caring matters, even when curing fails. The plague doctor removes his mask for a moment, revealing tired eyes and a face marked by deep lines. "They think I'm immune," he says quietly. "I'm just lucky, or cursed slower." You hand him a cloth to wipe his brow. He looks at you and smiles faintly. "You'll write about this one day," he says. "Make it sound noble." Outside, the wind picks up, scattering ash from the fires. The city skyline glows faintly orange, as if fevered. You see a group of flagellants, men stripped to the waist, whipping themselves as they march, chanting penitence. They think the plague is punishment, the doctor says. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's just the rats. You half expect him to laugh, but he doesn't. By nightfall, you've seen enough to haunt 10 lifetimes. Yet among the misery are sparks of hope. Women brewing fever teas, children leaving bread on sick beds, neighbors ringing bells to announce still alive. You realize that every gesture, however futile, is an act of defiance. When the doctor finally dismisses you, he presses a small sachet into your hand. Inside are rose petals, mint, and vinegar-soaked wool. "Keep it close," he says. "It won't save you, but it'll remind you to breathe." You thank him, though words feel useless. You walk away through silent streets, the wind carrying the faint echo of bells and prayers. The moon hangs low, watching this medieval nightmare unfold with the patience of eternity. And though your stomach turns at the memory of what you've seen, you can't help but marvel at humanity's stubbornness, this endless urge to heal, to hope, even when surrounded by death. The fires burn lower as you reach the edge of town. The air tastes of smoke and salt tears. Somewhere a child coughs. Somewhere else someone laughs, soft, defiant, alive. You close your eyes and keep walking. The night is far from over, and there are still stranger remedies waiting in the kitchens of desperation. By the time you escape the sound of bells and coughing, dawn has crawled over the rooftops. The streets are quieter now, though a faint haze still drifts in the air, a mix of chimney smoke, ash, and something sour that could be yesterday's medicine. You follow the smell of yeast and wine into a narrow lane where a wooden sign swings above a doorway. A loaf, a mortar, and a goat. Someone inside is cooking up hope, or maybe just indigestion. You push the door open. A woman stirs a pot large enough to fit a child, humming an off-key tune about Saint Roch and his dog. "Welcome, traveler," she says, without turning. "You look like you need something warm or strong." Both sound excellent. "What are you brewing?" you ask. She ladles up a spoonful of grayish paste that smells like sour bread and regret. "A cure," she says proudly, "for everything but the plague, and I'm working on that one." She's not a witch, not a monk, not an apothecary, just a housewife with a sharp nose and too much time near an open fire. In times like these, everyone's a doctor, especially if they own a pot and an opinion. "The trick," she says, "is balance. You must mix things from God's kitchen." She gestures at her shelf. Loaves of bread gone hard as rocks, a bottle of wine, and a chunk of goat fat wrapped in cloth. Bread for the body, wine for the soul, fat for the finish. You assume she's joking. She isn't. She smears the mixture onto a piece of linen and presses it to your arm. There, for strength. It's warm, squishy, and smells faintly like dinner and disaster. "You'll want to leave that on overnight," she says. "It draws out the bad humors, or the fleas, whichever's louder." These homemade remedies fill every kitchen now. Vinegar washes, onion poultices, garlic necklaces, honey compresses, half of them harmless, some surprisingly useful. And a few just excuses to make soup out of anything still breathing. "My mother swore by pigeon broth," she says, dropping another dubious ingredient into the pot. "The bird must still be warm when plucked. Life chases death away." You make a mental note never to dine here. She hands you a cup of something steaming. "Drink." You hesitate. "It's wine with sage," she assures you. "Good for the lungs, bad for the tongue." You sip. It's awful but oddly comforting, like being scolded by a caring aunt. The warmth creeps through your chest, and you realize that half of her healing is simply feeding people who haven't eaten properly in weeks. Her neighbor bursts through the door holding a basket of onions. "For the children's feet," she cries. You blink. The woman nods solemnly. Yes, sliced onions in the shoes. They draw out illness through the soles. The neighbor dumps the basket on the table and starts slicing with religious fervor. Soon, the air is a battlefield of smells: wine, garlic, goat, and now onion. You'd feel sorry for the illness trying to survive this mix. You'll learn quickly that medieval kitchen cures rely on 3 sacred principles. If it stinks, it's strong. If it burns, it's working. And if it's edible, it's probably medicinal. Bread soaked in milk becomes a remedy for swelling. Beer doubles as antiseptic and antidepressant. And cabbage juice, according to the neighbor, can fix everything from headaches to heartbreak. Historians still argue whether that's optimism or masochism. The woman pulls out a jar of honey so thick it glows in the morning light. Now this is real medicine, she says, drizzling it over a wound on her arm. Seals the hurt, keeps out bad air. And for once, she's right. Modern science would later prove honey's antibacterial powers. You tell her this, and she looks pleased. So the future agrees with me, she says, as if she expected no less. Behind her, a small boy pokes his head through the curtain, clutching a frog. For mother's cough, he says proudly. She sighs. That's last week's cure, dear. We're on goat fat now. She pats his head and releases the frog outside, where it hops away, perhaps relieved to escape its pharmaceutical destiny. You can't help but smile. In a world with so little control, superstition is just another word for comfort. A knock at the door interrupts your thoughts. A traveler limps in, coughing into a rag. The women exchange nervous glances, but wave him toward the fire. Sit, the cook says. You need warmth? She ladles broth into a bowl and sprinkles herbs across the top. Rosemary for strength, thyme for courage, and a dash of salt for luck. The man drinks, sighs, and smiles weakly. For a moment, the room feels almost sacred, simmering with care, not fear. Then the neighbor lowers her voice. They say in the next village, a healer uses boiled cow dung. The cook snorts. That's not healing. That's blasphemy. You nearly point out that she just rubbed goat fat on your arm, but decide to let it slide. Everyone draws the line somewhere. Outside, the bell tolls again, faint and far. The cook pauses, listening. Another gone, she murmurs. Then she stirs her pot faster, as if trying to drown out the sound. We cook louder, she says. That's how we fight death here, noise and soup. You help her carry bowls to the street, where hungry faces appear from doorways. Children clutch bread crusts. Old men sip wine-spiked broth, and somewhere in that strange communion, the fear lifts, if only for a moment. Food as medicine, medicine as comfort. You realize this kitchen, smoky and chaotic as it is, may be the closest thing to healing most people will ever get. As the sun climbs higher, the cook wipes her hands on her apron. You see, she says, grinning. You don't need doctors when you have spoons. You laugh because she's half right. Even centuries later, soup still fixes almost everything, except maybe goat fat poultices. Before you leave, she packs a small loaf for you, still warm from the hearth. Take this, she says. Bread remembers kindness. You tuck it into your satchel, the scent mingling with sage and vinegar. And if you meet a doctor, she adds, tell him to wash his hands. Even I know that much. You step back into the sunlight, belly warm, arm sticky, and heart strangely steady. The road ahead smells of smoke and horses, but for the first time in a while, the air doesn't taste like fear. Maybe because you've just seen medicine at its simplest, love disguised as leftovers, and somewhere beyond the village, rumors drift of holy wells, sacred snakes, and miracles bottled by men with more faith than facts. You grin. The next chapter of your strange pilgrimage is already hissing, waiting among relics and reptiles. You follow the scent of incense and burnt wax out of the village and toward the hills. The path winds through brambles until it opens onto a broad clearing littered with shrines. Each shrine is stacked with offerings, coins, ribbons. little bundles of herbs tied with faith instead of science. Pilgrims shuffle past, murmuring prayers to saints whose names you can barely pronounce. Someone presses a sprig of thyme into your hand. For safety, they whisper. You tuck it into your sleeve, just in case the saints are taking attendance. A wooden cross stands in the center, draped in flowers already wilting. Beside it, a woman kneels, holding a jar of cloudy water that supposedly came from a spring blessed by Saint Winifred herself. She offers you a sip. You hesitate. It cures fevers, she insists, and heartbreak and boils and bad luck. You take a cautious mouthful. It tastes like minerals and myth. Historians still argue whether such holy wells were faith or just fancy branding for groundwater. But to the people here, miracles are medicine that never runs out. Further along, a man waves you over to a small tent. He wears bright green robes and a smile too wide to trust. "Good health to you, traveler," he booms. On his table sit glass vials of glistening oil, each labeled with hand-painted snakes. "Extract of serpent," he declares, "blessed by monks of the Nile." You raise an eyebrow. "Cures what ails you, gout, melancholy, even the evil eye." You've met your first snake oil salesman, literally. He uncorks one vial and holds it beneath your nose. The smell hits like a punch of rancid olive oil. "Pure venom tempered by faith," he says proudly. "A drop on the tongue and your humors realign." You politely decline. He shrugs. "Then perhaps a charm?" He produces a small amulet, a bronze disc engraved with a coiled serpent. "Wear this, and no sickness will find you." You notice a pile of similar charms behind him, each bearing different saints, saints that likely never agreed to this partnership. As ridiculous as it seems, you realize people crave hope as much as healing. In times when plagues feel like punishment, superstition becomes the only prescription that soothes. The salesman even quotes scripture, something about Moses and the bronze serpent. "See," he says, eyes gleaming, "faith and poison, joined as one, balance." You almost admire his commitment to the theme. You wander on through the rows of shrines. One is dedicated to Saint Blaise, protector of throats, another to Saint Roch, patron of plague victims. Pilgrims touch the statues, leaving offerings of bread, ribbons, and little lead badges shaped like body parts. Arms, legs, hearts, even eyes. These are ex-votos, tokens of thanks for healing received or hoped for. The ground around the shrines glitters with hundreds of them. It's oddly beautiful, a gallery of pain turned into prayer. Nearby, a monk tends a fire, boiling herbs in a pot. He explains that the mixture will be poured into a nearby stream, so that anyone who drinks downstream receives a blessing in every sip. You ask what herbs he's using. "Wormwood, mint, and holy salt," he says. You're tempted to ask if that's a recipe or a baptism, but he looks so earnest that you let it be. Then he shows you a relic, a fragment of bone in a crystal case. "St. Margaret's rib," he whispers. "It heals women's pain." Pilgrims line up to touch it, dropping coins into a wooden box. One woman sobs as she presses her forehead to the glass. The monk blesses her gently, and for a moment, you can almost believe the rib works. Not because of the bone, but because of the belief. Historians still debate whether relics cured through divine power or pure psychology. You decide it doesn't matter. If hope brings peace, that's a kind of cure too. A child tugs at your sleeve, offering you a sprig of dried rosemary tied with red thread. "For safe travel," she says. Her mother nods from the crowd. You thank them, slipping it into your pocket next to the time. You're collecting blessings like souvenirs now, each one worth more than any prescription. At the far end of the field, a man preaches from atop a barrel. "The Lord sends signs," he cries, waving a jar containing what looks suspiciously like a dead snake in wine. "Drink and be reborn." The crowd murmurs approval. You recognize the salesman's handiwork. Apparently business and salvation are joint ventures these days. Still, some pilgrims drink, their faces calm. Whether it's placebo or poison, you can't tell. But the ritual unites them, a shared performance of survival. As dusk falls, candles flicker across the hillside, turning the shrines into constellations of trembling light. The air smells of wax and rosemary. A group begins to sing softly, a hymn blending Latin and longing. You sit on a stone, listening. For all its absurdity, there's comfort here. The same desperate faith that buys snake oil also builds cathedrals. It keeps people breathing when medicine can't. You look down at your hands, now streaked with ash from the candles, and realize how many times you've touched symbols tonight, crosses, charms, relics, even the soft skin of strangers, praying for a cure. Touch itself is healing, even when the science is non-existent. The plague doctors, the monks, the witches, the cooks, all of them grasping the same truth from different ends. Humans can't bear to be helpless. The singing fades, replaced by the crackle of the shrine fires. You stand, brushing ash from your sleeves, and glance one last time at the crowd, faces lit with faith, fear, and fatigue. You can't decide if you're leaving a church or a marketplace. Maybe both. Down the slope, a thin trail leads toward a larger city, where lights shimmer like distant stars. You hear rumors of new medical wonders there, surgery without faith, knowledge without saints. Maybe they'll have answers that don't come bottled with snakes or stamped with blessings. You tighten your cloak and start walking. The smell of incense still clinging to you like a prayer you're not sure you believe. The city looms ahead, gray and grim, but strangely alive. A patchwork of stone towers, market stalls, and shouting voices that carry like echoes through an open wound. You step into the noise, clutching your cloak tighter. The smell hits you first. Iron, smoke, and something sharp and sour that turns your stomach. Somewhere nearby, someone screams, and you know you've arrived at your next lesson in medieval medicine, surgery. You follow the sound down a narrow alley to a courtyard filled with people. They're gathered around a wooden platform where a man in a stained apron sharpens a long blade with a rhythm too cheerful for what's about to happen. A sign nearby reads, "Surgery publique, donations welcome." Apparently, this is both theater and education. The barber surgeon, yes, another of that versatile breed, raises his hand for silence. "Friends," he booms, "today we mend a limb and prove God's mercy." His patient, a trembling man with a pale face and a leg that looks like it lost a fight with a horse cart, doesn't look particularly reassured. You inch closer. There's no anesthetic. Not yet. Not for centuries. Just a wooden stick for the patient to bite and a few men to hold him still. The surgeon pours wine over the wound, not to sterilize it, they don't know that word yet, but to fortify the flesh. He mutters a quick prayer, wipes his blade on his sleeve, and begins. The crowd murmurs as blood spills onto the planks. Some gasp, some cheer, and a few take notes like scholars. The surgeon works fast. Speed is mercy. With practiced movements, he saws clean through the bone and ties off the stump with a strip of linen dipped in egg white and honey. You wince at the sound, but the crowd applauds. "A fine cut," someone shouts. The patient faints, which everyone agrees is a blessing. Historians still argue whether these public surgeries were acts of education or sheer spectacle. You suspect both. Knowledge is rare, entertainment rarer, and blood draws an audience like any good miracle. Afterward, the surgeon turns to the crowd, holding up the severed limb like a trophy. "The body," he declares, "is but a vessel of humors and vessels. Understand it, and you master pain itself." You're not convinced anyone's mastering pain today, least of all the patient. Still, you admire his bravado. These early surgeons, crude as they seem, are pioneers, experimenting with ligatures, cautery, and sometimes luck. When the crowd disperses, you linger. The surgeon spots you and grins. "You've got a steady eye," he says. "Care to learn?" You hesitate, but nod. He leads you behind the platform, where tools glint in the half-light. Saws, scalpels, forceps, needles. "Every instrument has a song," he says, running his fingers over the metal. "You just have to learn its rhythm." He shows you how to bind a wound using silk thread soaked in vinegar. "Keeps out rot," he claims. He's half right. Acidity does slow some infection. You stitch a scrap of cloth under his instruction, the thread pulling tight like a heartbeat. "Good," he says. "You've got gentle hands. That's rare. You don't mention your knees are shaking." On a table nearby sits a small pot of greenish ointment. "Comfrey and lard," he explains. "Soothes burns." You smile, recognizing the witch's touch again. Herbal knowledge smuggled into the surgeon's world. He shrugs. "We steal from whoever gets results." A rare bit of honesty in a trade built on bravado. A young apprentice runs up with a bucket of steaming pitch. "For sealing wounds," he says. The surgeon nods approvingly. You watch as he demonstrates, pouring a little over the stump, the smell acrid and thick. The patient groans, half-conscious, and someone mutters a prayer. "It'll hold," the surgeon says, "if he survives the night." His tone is pragmatic, not cruel. In this world, hope is measured in hours. He wipes his hands and sits on the edge of the stage. "People think we're butchers," he says quietly, "but we study the body. Every wound teaches." He gestures to a stack of parchment sketches, rough anatomical drawings labeled in Latin. "The universities forbid dissection," he adds, "so we learn from the dying instead." You can't decide if that's devotion or desperation. He tells you about Guy de Chauliac, the great French surgeon who wrote Chirurgia Magna, a textbook that tried to bring order to this chaos. "He taught us to cleanse wounds with wine," the surgeon says proudly, though most prefer ale. You wonder if de Chauliac's ghost is rolling his eyes somewhere. A bell rings from across the square, and the surgeon stands. "Another patient," he says. "A good day's work." You glance at the blood-soaked boards. "Good?" He grins. He lived. In his trade, that counts as triumph. As you leave, you pass a woman clutching her child's arm in a sling. The surgeon's apprentice wraps it gently, humming a hymn. The child smiles faintly. You realize that for every horror here, there's also compassion, a crude, calloused kind, but real. These surgeons, these improvising heroes, build the scaffolding of medicine one limb at a time. Outside, the sky darkens. The smell of iron lingers in your clothes. You find yourself thinking not of the blood, but of the precision, the way the surgeon's hands moved with confidence learned through loss. He might not know about bacteria or anesthesia, but he knows courage, and that counts for something. You wander toward a quieter street, the noise of the market fading. Somewhere behind you, another scream rises, then falls into silence. You breathe deeply, promising yourself that the next stop on this journey will be gentler. Maybe something about beauty, or relaxation, or, well, anything that doesn't involve saws. You follow the glow of lanterns toward the upper town, where nobles paint their faces and sip perfumed wine, blissfully unaware that half their cosmetics could double as poison. You shake your head. You've survived bleeding, leeches, and surgery. Now it's time to see how vanity kills the healthy just as efficiently as ignorance kills the sick. The upper town smells entirely different from the markets and plague streets below. Here the air is perfumed with rosewater, not rot. You stroll past marble fountains and banners fluttering in the breeze, through a world where illness is an inconvenience, not a sentence. Candles glow behind stained glass windows, illuminating faces powdered to ghostly perfection. You can almost taste the luxury and the lead. You arrive at the home of Lady Isolde, a noble renowned for her beauty and her chronic tendency to faint dramatically. Her maid ushers you in with a curtsy, whispering that Milady is preparing for a ball and could use a touch of the apothecary's insight. You try not to look alarmed as you spot the array of jars on her vanity, alabaster pots labeled cerussa, arsenicum, sublimate, and, just to keep things spicy, aqua fortis. Each one gleams like powdered moonlight. Each one is toxic enough to make your hair stand on end. Lady Isolde smiles faintly, her skin smooth and pale as candle wax. "Do you admire it?" she asks, dabbing her cheek with a cloth dipped in what you suspect is vinegar and white lead. It keeps the blemishes away. You murmur something non-committal. The truth is, her skin looks perfect because it's practically petrified. Historians still argue whether noble women truly believed these mixtures were harmless or simply ignored the risks for beauty's sake. Either way, fashion wins every time. She gestures toward a crystal bottle. "The Venetians make the best powders," she says, "refined from ceruse and vinegar." You nod, though you know ceruse, basic lead carbonate, is the slowest, prettiest poison in the world. The stuff eats through skin and lungs alike. Still, it gives the desired look, pale, smooth, ethereal. In an age when sunlight and labor mark you as common, deathly pallor means luxury. "Better pale and admired," she says lightly, "than ruddy and forgotten." You resist the urge to cough. Her maid brings a small jar labeled belladonna. "Beautiful lady. The extract, derived from deadly nightshade," she explains, "brightens the eyes and dilates the pupils." Isolde tilts her head back as her maid drips a single bead into each eye. Within seconds, they glisten dark and glassy, like a doze. "It makes me irresistible," she murmurs. You think it also makes her look like she's just seen the ghost of common sense. Belladonna was indeed used for beauty in the Renaissance and beyond. It blurred vision, quickened the pulse, and in large doses could kill. "A little pain for a lure," Isolde says dreamily. "Men faint for me." You consider fainting preemptively, just to fit in. The air thickens with the smell of perfume, ambergris, civet, rose oil. She spritzes a few drops onto her neck. "Made from whale and musk," she says proudly. You smile politely. "Ah, yes," you reply. "Nothing says elegance like the scent of sea mammal and cat gland." She laughs, not catching the sarcasm. "It lasts longer than flowers," she says. You can't argue that. Across the vanity sits another jar, this one with a faint shimmer. powdered mercury mixed with egg whites, the latest fashion for smoothing wrinkles. "My husband swears I'm younger every year," she says, dabbing it along her jawline. You nod again, wondering how long he'll keep saying that once she starts hallucinating. Mercury, you know, doesn't just polish silver. It polishes sanity. She notices your gaze drifting and lifts her chin proudly. "We follow the physician's advice," she says. "They say beauty reflects inner harmony. If the face is fair, the soul must be balanced." That's one interpretation of Galenic theory you haven't heard before. Still, you marvel at how the same obsession with humors that led peasants to bleed themselves now leads nobles to marinate in poison. Equality at last. The maid interrupts with a steaming bowl of something fragrant. Her daily tonic, she explains, for vitality. You peer in. It's a golden liquid flecked with silver leaf. "Distilled from gold and pearls," Isolde says, sipping delicately. "Alchemists call it potable gold." You nearly choke. "You drink metal?" She smiles serenely. "Only the finest." You can't decide if she's incredibly brave or spectacularly doomed. Alchemists, those mystical chemists of the Middle Ages, promised eternal youth through the ingestion of purified metals. Gold, they said, strengthened the spirit. Mercury aligned the humors. In practice, it aligned your body with the grave. Yet the myth persisted. The rich chased immortality with the same fervor peasants chased bread. The irony, of course, was that both usually ended up equally dead. Isolde sighs contentedly and turns back to her mirror. "Sometimes I envy the peasants," she says. "They age, but they laugh." She studies her reflection. We fade quietly, like frescoes. Her tone softens. "Still, it's lovely, isn't it?" You can't deny it. She looks like art. Fragile, luminous, doomed to crack. Historians still debate whether the nobility's obsession with paleness was mere vanity or a cultural echo of fear, of contagion, of sunlight, of mortality itself. Perhaps in coating themselves with death's colors, they learned to flirt with it gracefully. As she finishes her ritual, she opens a small wooden chest. Inside are tiny glass vials of rouge made from crushed cochineal insects and cinnabar. "A little color for the lips," she says, applying a careful streak. Men like a woman who seems half alive. You wonder if that's exactly the problem. When she's done, she sits perfectly still, like a statue brought to life just enough to sigh. "Do you know," she says softly, "that queens use arsenic baths to keep their skin soft?" You nod. You've heard the stories. Poison as exfoliant, luxury as slow suicide. "If I must die," she adds, smiling faintly, "let it be beautifully." You can't help but respect the theatrical commitment. In an age without cameras, beauty is a fragile currency, traded daily against one's health. And yet, in her way, Isolde is as much a healer as a patient, crafting control from chaos, defining her body on her own decadent terms. Before you leave, she presses a sachet of rose petals into your hand. "To freshen your travels," she says. You tuck it into your pocket beside the witch's charm and the monk's herbs, realizing your collection of medieval mementos now covers every social class and every shade of delusion. Outside, twilight paints the city gold. You glance back through her window where she still sits, glowing softly under candlelight. You wonder how long her light will last before the poisons take their quiet toll. Then again, in this age, everyone's dying of something, if not plague or surgery, then vanity. As the bells toll for evening prayer, you follow the street downhill again, toward the taverns where Whispers of love potions and heart remedies flow as freely as the ale. If beauty can kill, surely love can too, and it's time to see what kind of cures are brewed for that particular affliction. The street widens as you descend from the perfumed palaces into the tavern quarter, where the scent of rosewater gives way to roasted meat and spilled ale. It's late now, the kind of hour when every song sounds like a confession and every promise like a cure. Lanterns sway above doors painted with hearts and potions. You follow the glow to a booth draped in red cloth, where a woman with silver bracelets and eyes sharp as glass beckons you closer. Looking for love, she says, or looking to fix it? You grin. Whichever's cheaper. She laughs, the sound low and knowing. On her table sit bottles of colored liquid, scarlet, gold, green. Each one swirls like temptation, bottled and corked. A wooden sign reads, Elixirs of Affection by Mistress Sabine. She gestures to the bottles. Love and health, she says, are the same disease. The cure is chemistry. You suspect she's more merchant than mystic, but there's something magnetic about her confidence. This one, she says, lifting a ruby-colored flask, sparks passion. This one soothes jealousy. This one, she holds up a murky brown vial, brings regret. You ask if that last one's a side effect. Usually, she says, smirking. She pours a drop of the red liquid onto her tongue. Honey, cinnamon, and mandrake root, she explains, heats the blood. You've heard of mandrake before, the witch's plant, the one that screams when pulled from the earth. You believe that? You ask. She shrugs. It's not the root that matters, it's the story. In medieval times, love potions are the gray zone between medicine and magic, part chemistry, part theater, entirely dangerous. Historians still argue whether they ever truly worked or just worked enough to cause trouble. Some were simple, wine infused with herbs known to boost the pulse. Others included less romantic ingredients, bat's heart, dove's liver, or in one particularly haunting recipe, a drop of your own blood. Sabine pulls out a small book bound in leather, filled with spidery Latin. Recipes, she says proudly. You peek at the pages, powdered pearls for purity, rose petals for affection, crushed worms for loyalty, though how that connects, you'd rather not know. People pay most, she says, for potions that promise to undo love. She taps a black bottle. Forgetfulness is rarer than passion. At the next table, a drunk minstrel insists on buying a vial of the red potion. My heart's gone cold, he declares, slapping down coins. Sabine nods solemnly, mixes a splash of wine, honey, and maybe a whisper of pepper. He drinks, sputters, then grins foolishly. It burns, he says. That means it's working, she replies. You wonder how many broken hearts she's patched or caused this way. She leans toward you. The monks sell powders for chastity, she says, lowering her voice. I sell antidotes. You raise an eyebrow. An honest living, she winks. More honest than the priests, at least. Her humor is dry, but her gaze lingers on you with something softer. You want to know what love really is? She asks. It's alchemy. Two elements mixed in the wrong ratio, too much heat, and it explodes. You can't help but laugh. So, what's the antidote? She lifts a cup of watered wine. Time. And maybe garlic. It fixes everything. She tells you stories between sails, of noble women who paid for charms to win knights, of sailors who begged for potions to keep wives faithful, of queens who sent servants to fetch elixirs of obedience. Each tale sounds more absurd than the last, Yet each drips with truth. People will swallow anything if it promises control over their hearts. From her bag, Sabine pulls a small wooden charm shaped like a heart pierced by a nail. Hung over the bedpost, she says, it keeps your lover's eyes from wandering. You joke that modern relationships could still use those. She smirks. They'd just invent a new way to cheat. She pauses suddenly, her tone softening. Once, she says, I made a potion for myself. Rose, honey, a drop of my own tears. Drank it under a full moon. You wait. And? Didn't work, she says. But I cried less. She smiles, but her eyes glisten. Sometimes the cure isn't for the love itself, just for the ache it leaves behind. You sip the warm wine she offers, watching the candlelight flicker across her bottles. The tavern hums around you, laughter, music, the rustle of coins. Yet for a moment, the world feels still. You realize love potions, like all medieval cures, are just metaphors made edible. Whether it's leeches or mandrake or tears, the goal is the same: to turn emotion into something you can touch, measure, swallow, to make sense of what you can't control. Outside, a troubadour sings about heartbreak, his voice rising through the mist. The words drift through the open door, wrapping around you both. Sabine chuckles. He bought 2 potions last week, she says, still singing. Before you go, she presses a vial into your hand, a pale liquid that smells faintly of rose and vinegar. For courage, she says, or indigestion, works either way. You thank her, tucking it beside your growing collection of relics. Be careful, she adds. Too much of any cure becomes a curse. She gestures to the city. That's the real lesson of love. You step back into the street, the air cooler now, the stars sharp above. Around you, taverns buzz, lovers argue, and someone laughs too loudly to care about heartbreak. You breathe deeply, catching the mingled scents of wine and spice. The vial in your pocket feels warm, as if the potion itself remembers every story it's been part of. As you walk, you hear rumors whispered from the next district of kings who drink mercury to restore virility, of physicians debating what alive truly means. You shake your head. Love may burn the heart, but pride devours the mind, and that's a madness no potion can fix. The road bends toward the palace quarter again, though this time you don't hear music or laughter drifting from the high windows. Instead, the halls are quiet, watchful, and faintly sour with the smell of metal and incense. The guards at the gate glance at you with tired suspicion before letting you in. Rumor says the king himself is ill, again, and that the royal physician's remedies are as famous for their boldness as their casualties. You brace yourself for whatever new madness waits behind those gilded doors. Inside, the air feels thick, heavy with perfume meant to disguise sickness. Courtiers whisper in corners, clutching handkerchiefs soaked in rosemary oil. He's sweating mercury again, one mutters. Blessed miracle or cursed experiment depends who you ask. You catch another whisper. They say his hair fell out last week. You follow the murmurs to a grand chamber lined with silk curtains where the royal bed gleams beneath candlelight. The king lies propped against pillows, his skin pale and slick with some kind of ointment that glints like liquid silver. The physician stands beside him, smiling too confidently. You arrive just in time, he says, motioning for you to watch. The royal humors require alignment. He dips a golden spoon into a small bowl filled with a cloudy, shining substance. You recognize it instantly. Mercury, the favorite poison of the ambitious. He drinks this nightly, the doctor says proudly. It purges impurities and sharpens the mind. The king, trembling, nods weakly and opens his mouth. The spoon disappears, followed by a wince. You try not to gape. Mercury therapy has been around for centuries, prescribed for everything from syphilis to melancholy, even though it slowly dissolves the body from the inside. How long has he been on this treatment, you ask? A year, the doctor replies. His humors resist obedience. He stirs another mixture on the table, wine infused with powdered coral and crushed pearls. This balances the cold effect of the mercury, he explains. You suspect it mostly balances his income. The physician's assistants bustle about with trays of bottles and parchment charts marked with planetary symbols. His Majesty's illness corresponds to Saturn, one says, so we must apply lead to draw the heaviness outward. They unwrap a bandage around the king's arm, revealing gray stains along his veins. The doctor nods approvingly. The metal travels through the body, collecting sickness. You bite back the urge to say that it's also collecting him. Historians still argue whether royal physicians believed this nonsense or simply perfected the art of confident improvisation. In a corner, a scribe records every symptom like a sacred ritual. Pulse weak, he murmurs, color ashen, mood contemplative. The physician dictates each observation with the flourish of a poet. The royal soul, he says dramatically, is too bright for a mortal vessel. You almost applaud the performance. A servant enters, carrying a bowl of steaming herbs. For the fumes, the doctor says, waving the smoke toward the king's face. The smell is sharp and bitter, juniper and vinegar meant to cleanse the air. The king coughs violently, then smiles faintly, perhaps out of politeness or delirium. You see, the doctor says proudly. The body responds. You're fairly sure that response is agony. Nearby, another patient waits on a stool, a nobleman wrapped in blankets muttering nonsense. His Majesty's cousin, the doctor explains, treated for melancholy, too much study, not enough bloodletting. He signals an assistant who sets up a basin and knife. You look away, but the sound is unmistakable, the same wet rush you've heard too many times before. We must drain the dark thoughts, the doctor says, utterly serious. As the physician wipes his hands, he muses aloud. There is genius in imbalance. Perhaps the king's brilliance comes from divine excess. You glance at the trembling patient and wonder how much divine excess a body can withstand before it becomes tragedy. The Renaissance will call this madness of kings, and for good reason. He leads you to a cabinet filled with jars of powders and stones. Behold the philosopher's medicine chest, he says, eyes glittering. Inside are crushed sapphires, powdered emeralds, and something labeled aqua vitae. Distilled spirit, he explains, cleanses corruption. He pours a measure into a cup, then adds a pinch of gold dust to restore the sun's energy to his soul. You've seen enough to know that alchemy here is just superstition wearing a crown. Still, you can't deny the beauty of it, the shimmering liquids, the candlelight glinting on crystal, the sense that beneath the madness lies a genuine hunger for understanding. These royal doctors aren't fools, not exactly. They're scientists before science has rules, explorers mapping the body like uncharted land, armed only with faith, ambition, and ingredients that would terrify a modern pharmacist. As the session ends, the doctor dismisses the servants and turns to you with weary pride. We are making progress, he says. Yesterday he spoke Latin again. You glance at the king, now asleep, lips trembling. And today? Today, the physician says softly, he dreams in gold. You step outside into the courtyard where the night air feels almost too clean after all that mercury vapor. Above you, the stars burn cold and distant, the same constellations that guided bloodletting charts and dictated cures. Maybe, you think, that's the real madness, the idea that the heavens care enough to dictate who lives or dies. Behind you, faintly, the king begins to cough again. The physician calls for more ointment. You walk faster. The echo of that metallic sound, the spoon scraping the bowl, lingers in your ears like a warning. In the next district you hear rumors of scholars dissecting corpses by candlelight, defying church law to study what God never meant them to see. Maybe there, at last, you'll find sense among the superstition, truth carved quite literally from the flesh. You adjust your cloak and head toward the smell of wax and ink, where curiosity hums louder than prayer. The road winds away from palaces and perfumed chambers into the scent of ink, candle smoke, and damp parchment. You follow the hum of quiet voices to a stone archway bearing the crest of a university, one of those rare sanctuaries where reason and faith wage their polite, eternal war. Inside, scholars in robes shuffle through narrow halls, clutching scrolls like shields. You pass walls carved with Latin mottos, per scientiam ad salutem, through knowledge to healing. You hope they mean it literally. The lecture hall feels more like a chapel than a classroom. Long benches rise in tiers around a central wooden table, and at the table's center lies a body, fresh enough to make you swallow hard. The air is sharp with vinegar and beeswax, a crude attempt to hide the odor of mortality. A group of students murmur prayers under their breath. One makes the sign of the cross. Another holds a quill so tightly it trembles. At the head of the room stands the lecturer, a man with silver hair and eyes like glass. His voice is calm, precise, and far too casual for what's about to happen. Gentlemen, he says, observe how God writes his mysteries in flesh. He picks up a scalpel, its edge glinting in candlelight. You recognize the ritual. This is an anatomy lesson, half science, half sermon. The body before him is a criminal, they say, granted to the university by the crown, because who else would volunteer for dissection in an age when even autopsies feel like blasphemy? The church forbids desecration, the lecturer continues, but knowledge must live somewhere. He makes the first incision, clean and quick. You try not to flinch as the skin parts under the blade. The students lean forward, faces pale and hungry for understanding. He narrates as he works, naming bones and muscles like sacred relics. This, he says, is the liver, the seat of passion and courage. He lifts the organ carefully. Aristotle claimed it brewed blood. Galen said it tempered the humors. He smiles faintly. They were wrong, but magnificently so. Historians still argue whether dissections like these were acts of rebellion or reverence. Each cut a prayer for truth. He gestures to the heart next. Here lies the throne of the soul, he says, or so they believed. He squeezes it gently, and a faint trickle of dark blood seeps out. See how it contracts? The ancients thought it burned like a tiny furnace, but perhaps, he pauses, almost whispering, it is only a pump. The students gasp. One crosses himself again, as if to ward off heresy. You realize you're witnessing something dangerous, an idea so simple it could unravel centuries of doctrine. In the back row, a young scholar scribbles furiously in the margins of his notebook. His ink-stained fingers shake with excitement. He reminds you of curiosity itself, restless, reckless, unstoppable. The lecturer catches your gaze and smiles. The church says faith and reason must agree, he says softly, but reason asks questions faith cannot answer. He points to a chart on the wall, the human body mapped like a constellation, lines connecting organs to zodiac signs. Medicine, he says, was once ruled by stars, but perhaps the stars are simply jealous that we've begun to chart ourselves. He chuckles, then adds, "Do not write that down. I enjoy breathing." He moves to the skull next, cracking it open with a tool that sounds far too cheerful for the task. Inside the brain gleams wet and pale. "Here," he says, "is where thought resides. Some say the heart feels, the stomach hungers, the soul sings, but the mind dissects." He taps his temple. The mind is the only instrument sharper than the knife. One student faints. Another rushes to help. The lecturer sighs. "It happens every time," he mutters, covering the body with a linen cloth. "We study death to preserve life, yet life insists on reminding us it's fragile." After the lecture, he invites you to his chamber, a cluttered cave of manuscripts, bones, and half-melted candles. "Sit," he says, pouring you a cup of weak wine. "You've seen the barber-surgeon's trade, yes? All cuts, no cause." You nod. "We chase the cause," he continues. "We seek the why beneath the wound." He holds up a small glass jar containing a shriveled organ. "One day we'll know what makes this fail and how to stop it." His voice softens. "But for now, we learn by loss." On the shelf behind him sits a copy of De Humani Corporis Fabrica, Vesalius's masterpiece, an anatomy book that will soon change medicine forever. "He drew the truth," the scholar says reverently. "The church burned his drawings in some cities, but not all. Fire can't erase what's been seen." You leaf through the pages carefully, exquisite woodcuts of skeletons posed like dancers, muscles peeled back in ribbons of grace and horror. He showed the body not as sin, the lecturer says, but as structure, divine, yes, but decipherable. You can't help but feel awe. Each drawing is both reverence and rebellion, a bridge from superstition to science. He sits back, weary. "Do you know what the hardest part of medicine is?" he asks. "Not finding the cure. It's convincing others that what they've always believed might be wrong." He rubs his eyes. The mind resists change more than the body resists death. You think back to the apothecaries, the monks, the witches, the surgeons, the kings, all of them trapped in their own logic, their own comfort. Maybe progress is just the courage to doubt loudly enough to be heard. Outside, the bells toll midnight. The lecturer closes the anatomy book gently. "Enough for tonight," he says. "We'll resume at dawn." You rise, but before you leave, he offers a final thought. "If there is a soul," he murmurs, "perhaps it hides not in the heart or the stars, but in the questions we keep asking." You step into the cold night. The stars glitter overhead, distant and indifferent. Yet below them, in flickering candlelight, the first sparks of modern medicine are being born, quietly, bravely, one incision at a time. As you walk away from the university, the echo of the lecturer's words follows you like a benediction and a warning. You can almost feel dawn coming, a slow, fragile light creeping over centuries of darkness. You wonder how many more strange remedies, how many more desperate hopes will fall away before the world finally learns what healing truly means. Dawn comes softly, bleeding pink and silver across the rooftops. You walk through streets washed clean by mist, past shuttered apothecaries and silent taverns, the echoes of everything you've seen trailing behind like ghosts. The leeches, the mercury, the prayers, the potions, they blur together now, less like history and more like a fever dream. You can almost hear the heartbeat of an age, waking from ignorance, slow but steady, stubbornly alive. In the square, a man sells fresh bread beside a woman hawking rosemary sprigs. They argue cheerfully about whose trade heals the soul faster. You smile. After nights of blades and blood, such arguments feel almost holy. You take a piece of bread, warm and fragrant, and breathe deeply. For the first time, the air doesn't reek of medicine. It smells like life trying to begin again. You pass the old barber shop. The striped pole still turns lazily in the wind. The doors shut tight now, the sign faded. Maybe the barber found a new trade. Maybe his razors finally went dull. Across the street, the apothecary's window glints with dusty jars, each one labeled in careful Latin. Mummy powder, theriac, dried toad, all relics of belief disguised as science. You tap the glass gently, like greeting an old friend who taught you more than they meant to. Further down the lane, you see a familiar face, the old monk with his basket of herbs. His robe is patched now, his gait slower, but his hands are still steady as he lays sprigs of mint and lavender on a market stall. "The humor's behaving," you ask. He chuckles. "Mostly, but the soul's still unpredictable." He holds up a vial of oil, its scent warm and green. "Some things never go out of fashion." He tells you that fewer people come for bleeding now. They want powders that taste of reason, he says, not faith. You picture the young scholars in the university, dissecting by candlelight, daring to name organs for what they are instead of what the stars demand. The monk smiles wistfully. "Perhaps they'll succeed," he says. "But never forget, the world doesn't heal just because we understand it. It heals because someone still bothers to care." You thank him and continue walking, your satchel heavy with mementos, charms, herbs, a vial of rose water from a lady who may already be gone. They rattle softly like beads on a rosary, each one a prayer to human stubbornness. You think of all the healers you've met, the barber with his blade, the witch with her wisdom, the cook with her soup, the scholar with his scalpel, all of them fumbling toward the same light, each believing they had the answer, each wrong and yet somehow necessary. Historians still argue whether the Middle Ages were dark or simply dimly lit. But as you watch the sun rise over the rooftops, you realize they weren't blind, they were searching. Every superstition, every bizarre cure, every whispered charm was a kind of reaching out, a human attempt to make pain bearable and mystery manageable. For every death, there was someone trying to save a life, even if it meant boiling frog water or bleeding under Aries. The square fills slowly as the city wakes. Merchants shout greetings, children chase stray dogs, and a young boy runs past clutching a loaf too big for his hands. A woman laughs, and the sound echoes against the stone like a bell of its own. Life, messy and miraculous, insists on continuing. You realize that in some ways, it's the only real medicine that's ever worked. You wander to the river's edge, where morning light catches on ripples like silver threads. Somewhere upstream, the leeches still wriggle in their muddy kingdom, patient as ever. You drop a sprig of thyme into the water, watching it float away, a small offering to the strange healers who came before, those who believed that care was worth the risk, even when it made things worse. You close your eyes and picture them all, the apothecary bent over his scales, the surgeon gripping his knife, the monk chanting over a dying patient, the noblewoman painting her own poison, the scholar cutting open silence. They stand together in your mind, not as fools, but as ancestors of curiosity, each one holding a candle that burned just bright enough to pass to the next hand. You breathe deeply. The air tastes cleaner now. Maybe it's just morning. Maybe it's progress. You smile thinking of the modern world, vaccines, soap, sterile tools, and realize every comfort you take for granted was born out of their chaos. The barber's bowl became the surgeon's tray. The witch's herbs became medicine. Even superstition, once stripped of its fear, left behind something valuable: compassion, persistence, imagination. You sit on a low wall as the sun climbs higher. The warmth seeps into your skin slow and certain. Around you, the city hums with the sound of waking, footsteps, laughter, the soft creak of shutters opening. It's the sound of life refusing to end. And for all its filth and folly, the medieval world gave that gift too, proof that survival isn't elegance or intellect, it's endurance. You think of Lady Isolde's pale smile, of Sabine's love potions, of the royal doctor chasing immortality in a spoon of mercury. You think of every patient who prayed to saints, to science, or to sheer luck, and somehow lived long enough to teach the next generation what not to do. Maybe that's what healing really is, the slow, clumsy accumulation of wisdom, bought with pain. A bell rings in the distance, light and clear. You stand, stretching your stiff legs. The river glitters brighter now, alive with sunlight. We made it, you whisper, not to anyone in particular. Barely. The charm the forest witch gave you, the one for courage, rests warm in your pocket. You hold it for a moment, then smile. It's time to let it go. You drop it into the river. It sinks quietly, no splash, just a ripple. The past drifting back to the depths where it belongs. And as the ripples fade, the world exhales. The morning settles into stillness. The sounds soften, fading to a rhythm slow enough for sleep. You lean back, eyes half closed, letting the gentle lap of the river replace the chatter of centuries. All that noise, leeches, lances, prayers, powders, finally quiets into a single, steady heartbeat. Yours. You picture the apothecary's lantern flickering out, the barber's blade resting dull on the table, the witch's herbs drying peacefully in sunlight instead of fire. The fear drains away, leaving only curiosity. The world isn't cruel tonight, it's tired, but learning. Even pain, you realize, was just another teacher. The wind brushes your face, cool and forgiving. A gull cries somewhere upstream, the sound stretching and then melting into silence. You feel yourself drift, backward through history, forward into dreams, where no one bleeds you for balance or feeds you mercury for wisdom. There are no humors here, no sickness to purge, only breath in and breath out. If you listen carefully, you can almost hear them, the voices of all those healers whispering through time, softer now, no longer desperate, just curious. They're saying it's all right to rest, that every cure begins with stillness, that you've already survived the hardest parts. The air cools, the light fades behind your eyelids, and the last thing you see is the river's shimmer dimming to gray. Everything slows, your breath, your pulse, the turning of the world itself.